Well, thanks for coming back to part 2 of our video on making the hammer's eye punch and hammer eye drift. Today we're going to concentrate on the drift portion of this, and then we'll do some grinding and finishing on both the punch and the drift. And then the next and final video we will do the hardening and the tempering. So enjoy today's video. Thank you. Well, now it's time to work on the drift. We want a shape similar to this. This is actually a big enough steel. We're going to get a longer and larger drift. The advantage to that is the small end will do small hammers, and if you're doing larger eyes, you just have to work your way up the hammer eye. We're going to start this with a square taper, or square edge taper. It'll be rectangular. That thing gets a lot harder to forge as it cools off a little bit, so we're going to have to keep going back to the fire a little bit more often than we might with a piece of mild steel. Working over the horn will speed up the process. Just like we discussed the peen of the hammer acting like a rolling pin to stretch material, the horn does the same thing. I do like to straighten these out after every heat. Just keeps things in control and symmetrical. But we're getting pretty close here for this end. It's a little bit thinner probably. Then after that, it's just a matter of getting a nice even taper all the way to the other end. our handle was 3/4 of an inch by 1 inch. Then we can shape the handle, so this doesn't have to be perfect. But if we come up to where this is 3/4 wide, we are just under an inch. So I actually want to do a little bit more spreading and not so much work here, so that by the time we get up here, we're closer to the right combination of measurements, and then we'll start knocking the corners off. Remember to try and keep it straight and centered. So there we're at 1 inch wide and 3/4 thick. So that's about right. I'll clean this up a little bit more up here, even out the taper, then we'll take the corners down. Now, typically I would do a lot of this with a heavier hammer, or honestly, a power hammer, but I want to try and keep this as a beginner's project. Forge, hammer, anvil. You don't have to have all the other stuff. You don't have to have a 4-pound hammer. Just keep things simple to start with. So we've knocked the corners off. Now we can start rounding this up. The better you can get this right off the anvil, the less hot rasping or grinding you're going to have to do to clean this up and make a nice tool out of it. You should be able to be about 90% done right here. Now when you're knocking these corners down and rounding this, you end up upsetting or thickening the edge, kind of a mushrooming effect, and you end up with a little smaller in here. So make sure you come back and work it down from this surface so that you don't have that hollow. If you keep your anvil clean, you won't work so much scale into the piece, and it'll be easier to clean up later. That gets your knuckles hot. Here I'm lucky I've got the original round edge is going to be just perfect. Now it's time to turn it around. We got this turned around. We're going to work the fat end just a little bit. And we are going to taper this. Just a little bit. Make sure it's pretty straight. Just one last little low heat cleanup. And again, if all you've got is a farrier's rasp to shape this with, more time you spend at the anvil, the less time you'll spend with the rasp, but you have to do that hot. And no real forging at this low heat, just light cleaning up of some sharp edges, smoothing, planishing. So that's our jackhammer bit drift. Got just a little bit to straighten there, so I'll heat that up again. You're not going to straighten this thing cold very easily, so make sure it's good now. Okay, so that's our forged drift. You can say I have a grinder, so I'm going to clean it up on a grinder. If not, you can clean up some of the roughness with a farrier's rasp and finish it cold with a file. But to make grinding, filing, anything else you do go easier and to remove stress so it doesn't crack in use or when you harden and temper it, we'll bring it back up to temperature and we'll put it in the vermiculite just like we did the punch, and we'll let them sit until they're completely cool. Small piece like that, that's probably 2 or 3 hours. Larger pieces might be overnight. So don't be in a hurry to get back to it. It's just fine to leave it and come back tomorrow. Okay, so we've done the rough forgings on our punch and on our drift. And it's time to do the finishing work before we harden and temper them. We started with about 9 inches of material. I was aiming for at least 10 inches, or roughly 10 inches for the punch. The drift, I'm not too worried about if it's long. It's just almost 12 inches long. 11 3/4 probably. And that's out of 9 inches. And it always pays to check this. You start to develop a little bit of an intuitive feeling for how much material you want to cut to get a desired result when you make something, so you don't always have to be doing test pieces or wasting material after you're done because it was too long and you got to cut off 2 inches to make it what you want. Or worse, you make the tool and it ends up too short and you have to start all over again. But this one's about 10 inches. This is what I like for a handheld punch or a chisel. It just seems pretty ideal to me. Experiment on your own though. So the next thing is to clean this up. A punch needs to be straight across with fairly sharp edge. The transition is sharp, and it's not sharpened like a chisel, but where it goes from this angle to this angle shouldn't be rounded. Most blacksmith's tools, you want to round the edges. Punches need to be fairly sharp. There are other kinds of punches that come to a point or have other details, but this is a flat bottom punch or a slot punch, so this all needs to be fairly sharp edged. So that's this corner here and all the way around and flat across the bottom. You see right now it's a little domed. Now we could have done most of this hot with a hot rasp like I showed, but you can finish it also with a file if you didn't quite get it done, and sooner or later you're going to have to take a file to it anyways. So let's see what that might look like to work on this with just a regular old file. If you're going to work on something like this with a file, don't mess around with little itty bitty files. You'll just frustrate yourself in the long run. Start with a good coarse large file, and if you annealed this properly, this shouldn't be too bad. Learning to file is an important skill. It is an age-old blacksmithing skill. Files have been around almost as long as blacksmiths. They are a precision tool. You can do a lot of work with a file. That's just almost flat across the top now. So you don't really want to stand there and watch me file forever, but that's a lot better off than it was when we started. And I've crisped up the corners and taken some burrs off of there. It's a little bit crooked, so this side needs to come down. But you get the idea. If you want to, if that's all you've got, an hour with a file, they say time is money, but if your hour is worth $20 or $30 because you're a hobbyist, that's cheaper than buying a grinder. So a file is a good solution. On the other hand, if you have grinders, by all means use them. Certainly an angle grinder is a reasonable choice with either a stone wheel or I like a flap disc. Pardon me for a minute, I'm going to go put on my hearing protection and my dust mask to use a grinder, which is another advantage to a file. So you can see that goes a lot quicker than filing. An angle grinder is a pretty handy thing. This is, like I say, it's a sandpaper flap disc. This is a 40 grit disc. So after this I'll go to an 80 and probably to a 240 to finish it up. But I have a belt grinder, and that's even more efficient. But don't go out and buy a belt grinder just to make a few punches and chisels. Learn how to do them with hot rasps files, upgrade to an angle grinder, You can even use a woodworker's belt sander, but you'll probably wear it out and you won't be happy with it for woodworking. They aren't designed for metalworking. So unless you are done with it or just have a spare, I would avoid doing that any more than you have to. Okay, we got those ground. I didn't think you wanted to just sit there and watch me grind, so I did most of it off camera, but it only took about 15 minutes to do both of these. These have been now ground 60 grit, 120 grit, and 240 grit. And I think that's good enough for these tools. They don't need a mirror polish. If you really feel like it, feel free to take that up to a 600, 800, 1000, whatever you want to do. But it's going to get beat up in use and you're going to need to clean it up and regrind it quite regularly. And the same thing with this. You want to keep it sharp, so maybe every third or fourth hammer you might need to dress this a little bit and keep it in good shape. We'll see how hard they get. And that's the next process. We're going to light the forge, we're going to harden these, then we're going to temper them. And we're going to do that not with the electronic oven, but we'll do it with forge and by eye, and that will give us a look at the way blacksmiths typically do things. If you're not a full-time tool maker, you don't need an electronic oven. These simple steels, low carbon, medium carbon steels, are pretty reliable to harden and temper just in the forge. I think that looks like a good place to pause for today, have a little bit of an intermission. There will be a third part of the video. It's already filmed and should go up, if not right away, probably tomorrow. If you like the channel, please subscribe, give the video a like, and watch some of the other videos. And in the meantime, we'll see you later. Have a good evening.